sent a message to the hang gliding group chat last night. Crickets. But there's chatter on the paragliding group. Maybe the conditions will be flyable tomorrow. I go to bed with hope in my heart. I wake up and check the chats. Immediately, good news. 7 hang gliding pilots committed to flying. Even without looking at the lapse rate balloon, I know that these veterans have seen something that indicates good conditions. My hopes are high, and I race to get my glider onto the car and my things packed up for the drive to Santa Barbara. On the drive up north, I think about the things that I want to work on during this flight. Primarily, I've been thinking about my hand placement during landing. Talking with Willie, I need to lock down on not moving both my hands simultaneously from the base tube to the down tubes. Ideally, I'll bring up my left hand to the down tube while keeping my right hand on the base tube until I'm nearly rounded out. Only then, once I'm nearing the round out, do I bring my right hand also up onto the down tube for round out and then eventually flare. This is basically to eliminate a giant weight shift near the ground or while turning, because I'm moving hands while turning, which I shouldn't be doing. So I'm essentially trying to not move my hands in a turn. However, other factors that come up during my landing approach will complicate this significantly. But there's still a few things that need to happen before this drama plays out. Upon arriving at Parma Park, I'm overjoyed to hear that the pilots meeting at East Beach will have some space, and Daniel, a fellow pilot, will be giving me and Matt a ride up from Parma to Eliminator. Me and Matt park at Parma because we plan to land there since we can't land at the beach because we're not H4s. Upon arriving at Eliminator, our 8 gliders in the staging area are truly a sight to behold. But something even more pressing that I observed is paragliders not getting great lift initially. As we get our gliders set up and look around the skies, the gliders that launched from EJ, the paragliders, are doing okay above R&R, but the ones down by the antenna farm or roundhouse are not doing as well. Willie, as usual, gets into the air promptly. He starts to make it work after a low pass over the lower R&R area and scratches it out down by the school in Holy Hills, giving us glimpses of a flashing wing while we bide our time and wait. I'm starting to get a little bit anxious about getting into the air and wishing that I had thrown in a bid in the car to go up to EJ. But with my glider set up, I decide just waiting it out and flying down, even if a sled ride probably makes the most sense for me.
You ready?
When it's my turn to launch, I wait for a cycle. And
Clear.
that's a good cycle. Lean into my run. My eyes are still up. I'm trying to look at that horizon, keep the nose nice and level. Got to lean in for the run though, and I'm up in the air. So I'm thinking about this house thermal. I'm like, okay, right around here, I'm looking to the left. How far away am I from the hill? Could I do this turn? Waiting to start feeling a little bit more lift. Looking to the left again. Okay, like where am I? Could I make this turn? Look to the right. I thought about doing the turn right there. You can see me start to kind of go into it. And I'm like, no, you know what? I'm not feeling it. I don't want to turn left into the hill, but I also don't want to turn right into the valley. I don't know. I guess I thought I would get some sink or something. And so I just keep on cruising out and just do my normal flight path, which I've always done, which is nice and safe. And I think the right call for me today. Super cool seeing the rock climbers there. It's just really wild doing an action sport and then seeing an action sport happening below you. Just a really cool feeling.
Okay, so both of them did pretty good over here. What can I do on the old Falcon?
I see Little John and Daniel up above the thermal factory, which is above the antenna farm, fire up on that ridge. I think we can see that on the 360 cam a little bit. I know I can't get there. I have to go get some lift at the roundhouse or the antenna farm before I can get up there. So I gotta make some moves before that's gonna happen. And I'm just looking at them kind of being like, okay, like this could be possible actually. I might be able to pull this off. But I gotta insert myself correctly into the people thermaling over at the roundhouse first and work my way up there before that even happens. Plenty of altitude over this launch site, typically a paraglider launch site, but I've also seen Willie launch a tandem off of here before and hang gliders launch here before as well. So cool to be well over this. I know I have plenty of altitude to easily make it over the roundhouse, so that takes off a lot of stress for me. Just knowing I can just cruise out, get over there. And I'm just trying to stay high because there is definitely more lift along the edge here, rather than just going directly over the valley. So since I have plenty of altitude and I'm not worried about clearing the roundhouse ridge, I can stay super far left. If I was lower, I'd want to go to the right so I could go more in front of the roundhouse and lower on that ridge that it sits on. Cruising out here, just waiting to feel an indication of the lift that I'm seeing with these paragliders, and right there is where I start to get that bump, and I'm like, okay, the thing that I'm seeing with my eyes, I'm starting to actually feel with my body and my glider, and that's just a great reassurance to know that, okay, I'm actually going to be able to probably maintain or even gain some altitude here. So I look for this paraglider, I kind of lock eyes with him. Metaphorically, I don't think he's actually always looking directly into my eyes, but that's what I'm kind of trying to do and communicate to him, that I see him, I'm entering this thermal with him, and we're going to do this together now. So I'm kind of synced up, out of phase with his turn by 180. And so we're kind of across from each other in this circle, and I'm just trying to get lift and maintain here. So just keeping my eye on him, making sure our turn speeds are about the same, that I'm not cutting too wide or too shallow in the turn, and we're just doing it together and not having any conflicts because we're both locked in on the same system here. Got a glider coming out from the left there, something to kind of keep note of for me, but I know that he sees me, I see him. He's gonna, if he enters this thermal, presumably follow the pattern, and so I'll just keep doing what I'm doing and have him hopefully fall into place. That pass was pretty wild. The whole time I was like, okay, I'm pulling to the right, I'm pretty sure we both know exactly what's going on here, so it's gonna be fine, but I just can't turn left. So it's kind of two ships passing in the shipping lane, and it worked out great, and it was, you know, it's a stressful situation, but just trusting the other pilots and trusting myself that we're following the same rules, not that stressful. So really glad to kind of see the rules of the road, the right of way kind of play out in real time like that, and just have it work efficiently for me. This blue guy's starting to maybe circle with me, but a big thing that I'm really focusing on is doing these really nice tight turns. So let me know what you think if you're a pilot on how I'm doing. But a big thing I was really trying to focus on this flight especially was getting really nice, like, tight turns. One, because I knew the thermals would be small today, and then two, it's just something in general I'm trying to work on is getting these turns really tightened up and really, like, committing to a thermal turn more aggressively than I have in the past. Because just watching my videos back and hear comments and feedback, like, I'm not pushing the glider to its limits at all. So I can really get after it more, and it's something I've kind of been cautious about as I've learned and progressed doing these larger turns, but just getting more confident in trusting the glider and my ability to do these types of moves, because they're beneficial in thermals, is something I feel like I'm progressing on, and something that I think I did well in this flight. When it comes to landing, we'll see something that I did not do well. It's pretty funny watching this back, because back in like flight 10 for me, this would have been my best flight ever, or like a really good flight. But watching it now after having done this multiple hour flight at Santa Barbara, I'm just like, dang, like this was a short little sled ride. I just got a little bit of lift. But if I just take one little tiny step back and think to past John, this was an amazing flight. And I had an absolute blast in the air, and just watching it back, I'm like, this is a great flight. But at the same time, it's just like, it's crazy how quickly you get jaded about flight time.
The knee pads are huge. The comfort is like 10 out of 10, bro.
So, unfortunately, I'm slowly starting to lose my battle with gravity here. I don't think it's wise to continue to thermal out here. I need to get over the notch and kind of see what I can do as far as positioning. In hindsight, I actually have a lot of altitude here, so I probably could have done a few more 360s. But as I've mentioned in previous flights in this situation, it's just not worth the risk. And so, knowing I have a little bit of altitude, I do some nice, fun little S-turns here, just kind of practicing my glider control, and honestly, just having fun. Like, this is super fun to do. It's a challenge because it's kind of a new movement and kind of coordinating multiple turns together, but super fun. Amazing feeling. I'm just cruising out here, minding my own business, knowing I'm a little bit high, thinking about my landing, thinking about that hand transition that I want to try to work on. But all of a sudden, I start to feel a little something, a little bit of up air. And I'm like, oh, okay.
let's see what we can do with this. And so I turn right on into that up air and get a little bit of a thermal going, and I look over at my app, Wingman Running, and I see my altitude, and it's actually gaining a little bit. And I'm kind of blown away because I've never had a thermal here, but I've seen it, so I know it's possible, and I know I'm not just like daydreaming or like imagining things. Like, I'm actually getting lift here, which is surprising to me because it's not really a known trigger point in my head. I've definitely seen people thermal here, but as I'm getting into this thermal, I kind of have something click, and right there I stall the wing, and it's kind of a result of this thing that I'm trying to get to click. And at some point, I think I kind of crossed through a mental barrier or block that I had, and I guess I just want to talk a little bit about that. So, when controlling the glider, there's basically 4 things that I can do. I can pull in, I can push out, I can move my weight to the left, and I can move my weight to the right. Now, these things are independent but connected. So obviously left and right can't be done at the same time, and pushing out or pulling in can't be done at the same time. But going left and pushing out, or going left and pulling in, can be done at the same time. And so it was interesting to me in this flight, especially because I was focusing on tight turning in these thermal cores. Even though I'm pulling all the way to the right, at some point there's a limit to what I'm doing. And I kind of visualized this from the top down, almost like a joystick type of view, or like a weight kind of moving, hanging from like a wire, let's say, and then it's like getting pulled away from like the central, from the central axis. And that's exactly what my body's doing here. So something that kind of clicked for me was, okay, I have a maximum kind of like amount that I can pull left, and eventually the glider's just gonna kind of like flip over on its side or whatever, not do anything that efficiently. But if instead of just doing that, I also pull in, the glider speeds up, gaining a little bit more control authority, and then also generating a little bit more lift. And since my lift vector is now tilted, that higher speed and more lift means that I'm turning more. And then if I have enough speed, I can actually push out, slowing me down so it doesn't work forever, but it gives me a really temporary and super fast boost of speed. And it's, in my head, kind of how you would coordinated turn. I say this loosely because a glider can't truly coordinated turn like an airplane, where you use rudder to affect the slip angle of the aircraft turning, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, you can do a much more aggressive turn in a glider if you're pushing out with speed inside of a turn. And this is something I've known about and thought about in flight before. This isn't a new concept to me, especially even John in flight. But for some reason, when I was turning inside of this thermal core, and I think it had to do with the fact that there was this nice even lift gradient. I knew I had plenty of altitude before landing. I could kind of just mess around. This kind of playground feel. It just, something clicked in my head, and I feel kind of changed for it. Not profoundly different, but my thoughts of how I control the glider, I think, are fundamentally changed after this like 2-minute little experiment that I was doing in the air, because it just kind of clicked for me, like this like ability to do multiple things. And I've done the multiple things before, as far as, you know, going left, going right, pushing in, pulling out. Done that before at the same time, like simultaneous movements of pulling in, whatever. But something about the ability to pull in, push out while turning, it just really clicked for me. And I don't know what it was, but it felt really good. And just being able to experiment with that nice, gentle up air, stall the wing on one side, you know, get too fast, push out, get like a kind of a mini stall. It was really fun and nice to be able to play around with that in this thermal. So super thankful for this flight, especially for this like 1 or 2 minute segment. But all good things must come to an end. And eventually I realized it was probably time to start cruising out towards Parma, because I realized if I was this far away from the landing zone and got some sink air from the, say, the edge of a thermal maybe that was here, it felt like more a smooth lift gradient, so probably not. But if I did, I'd be kind of screwed. So while I still wanted to play around a little bit, I decided it was probably time to start cruising out towards Parma. So kind of bringing down the landing gear here, or thinking about it. So you can see my knees kind of poking their way out there. So I'm starting to think about landing very early, and we see Daniel coming in on his base and final approach here. I'm already thinking about my landing, and kind of leading up to this, I was thinking about his landing because I saw him kind of late, to be honest. And I was like, oh crap, like there's some other traffic in there. I got to think about this. Doing my 360 here, I'm looking at him, and I kind of already have my legs down, and I think that kind of is partly what created problems for me because I was almost too prepared for this landing. And my positioning is good right here. I'm looking at the LZ like I should be. I'm doing 360s, but this kind of nice light lift gradient, I'm actually not dropping that much. And so I didn't realize this in the flight, but looking at it now, I kind of see that I was maybe deceived by habit that doing a couple 360s here would put me down on the ground, which it did not in this flight. I wasn't dropping that much altitude because I was actually getting a little bit of lift here. And as I start to come around here, I noticed that I'm not doing a great approach. Not in flight, I noticed, but watching it back, I noticed, and you probably will notice as well, I'm kind of above launch, and I don't know what it was in my head, but for some reason, I remember distinctly in my head, I was like, oh man, I'm super low here, which I'm not at all. I'm super high, and I almost feel like I inverted the approach angle in my head. And so coming in here, I'm like kind of right above the landing zone almost, but really high above. So not even close to a 45 degree, like a 60 or 70 degree angle. And then turning in here on my base leg, I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm still super, super, super high. And I'm trying to line up my final now. And I'm just like, if I go much farther, I'm gonna have this crazy angle and be cross hill. So I have to go on final. That's kind of what I thought to myself. And so coming in on final, I already knew I was screwed. I'm looking at the top of the landing zone and I'm above it. And I'm like, crap, crap, crap. What's gonna happen? I flare, pulled in a little bit again on the flare. Hate to see that.
Woo! Getting a little high. I was like, oh, these trees are getting pretty close pretty fast all of a sudden.
I got you on video.
But this landing was terrifying. I was so close to hitting the rocks of the trees. So do not line up a landing like this. I got super lucky on this one and everything kind of worked out, but my actions going into this should not be repeated by me or anyone else. You do not want to land this high at any landing zone, especially Parma, because there's rocks and trees like right there. So I was like within 1 foot of like the danger envelope on this one. And kind of saved by the fact that the Falcon can do a big flare and lose a lot of speed. And in my head, I kind of thought that, you know, I was like, okay, I could do a big flare and I'll be fine in the tree. Like, it's going to suck, but like, I'll probably live. I did good on the hands though. And so I think, honestly, thinking too much about the hands kind of maybe screwed me because I was putting too many brain cycles thinking about my hand positioning. The thing I was talking about earlier about going from base tube to down tube, not simultaneously, I did great on, but my approach was not good. And so this is a good learning moment for me watching this back because I got, I would say, relatively lucky on this one. And talking with Daniel after the fact, I should have done a U-turn on my base leg, essentially. So I've already done my downwind. I'm too high. I'm like swinging wide on the base leg, thinking about going to final. And at that point, I knew I was high, and I should have just done a tight U-turn, come back, then another tight right turn, and then done my final. And then I would have been nice and low, and not low, but like lower and in a good position. And then that would have allowed me to come in and land at a much safer spot. And it's kind of scary watching it back just because it's something I've thought about before and visualized, and I don't know what happened on this one. And then also I did the thing where I did not hold my flare, and that's also something that I've thought about actively and consciously in flight on this flight. Like, okay, hold the flare, and it just didn't happen. So it's kind of unnerving to have your body do something that you're not telling it to do. And I'm not saying this is an involuntary response, but it kind of feels like a gut reaction for me to want to like pull in my hands. I think to kind of catch my fall or something in my head. Doesn't make sense, but I should just be holding that flare. And I did it. So a couple things to work on from this flight. Overall turned out to be a great flight. The landing turned out to be great, but was honestly terrible as far as technique. And I got pretty lucky on this one. in the fact that it was pretty much a good landing overall, but it was very sloppy, I would say, is probably a good way to describe it. But I got kind of lucky, to be honest. And so someday my luck will run out. But it doesn't matter if my luck runs out if I'm doing everything else properly. So I'll take one of the 9 live strikes on this one or whatever. And next time, I'm just going to get my technique dialed in and not have to rely on luck. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you're not already, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me grow the channel. I hate to kind of like self-promote and ask for it, but it really does help a lot if you subscribe. So please subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.